Yesterday, the Queen did not give the royal speech at the opening of Parliament for the first time in many decades. The obvious but often unspoken thing to pull from that is to wonder just how soon the end of her long reign is going to be and what it will mean when it arrives. It will have crossed many people's minds that they hope she will just still be with us to see the Jubilee celebrated next month. And as people celebrate that Jubilee, many people will know that they are celebrating the period, knowing it is imminently about to end. And what then for the royal family? What then for the country? Let's discuss. I think I've said before, by nature I'm a Republican, and of all of the objections that there are to be made about the various constitutional arrangements, I can't get past the arbitrary nature of a hereditary monarchy. Sure, an elected president might turn out to be terrible, but there's an inbuilt mechanism for dealing with that. In a reasonable period of time, if an unelected monarch turns out to be terrible, you have a much longer term problem. It's an issue we've been able to ignore for decades because, let's be clear, even an old Republican like me will recognise that the Queen has been astonishingly competent. In an era that, let's face it, has changed beyond all recognition, she kept a deft touch throughout, fortified by an unshakable commitment to duty and to serving the country. It's surely why she remained the head of state for so many countries in the Commonwealth, a fact that I still find pretty astonishing if I'm being honest. But can the royal family survive the next couple of generations, leaving aside whether it should, just for a minute? Right now we have wokeism, still determinedly tearing down any and every institution that shows a moment's weakness, and we already saw how this could play out with the royal family with the Oprah interview with Harry and Meghan, and the major stir that caused when it was suggested, without corroboration mind, that someone unknown but not the Queen or Prince Philip, had commented on the possible skin colour of the unborn baby to come. Because yes indeed, if this aged institution turned out not to be 100% in line with the language and values that emerged 5 minutes ago, then perhaps it too could be brought down by the righteous wrath of those blessed by always being on the right side of history. 10 years ago, people were a lot more down on Charles, the heir to the throne, than I think they are today. There was active talk about how maybe they could skip a generation and move straight to his eldest son William, who is more modern and more attractive in pretty much every way. But that's the point with a monarchy. You don't get to choose. Now, it does seem highly likely that the passing of the Queen will be the moment that a number of those Commonwealth countries decide it's time to move on, and we've already started to see the foreshadowing for some of that. But it doesn't yet feel like the United Kingdom is going to wake up the day after she passes with a new mood of republicanism abroad in the land. So King Charles is imminently to reign o'er us. I worked at Business in the Community, which had Charles as its president, so I had some small insights into the palace, I wouldn't overclaim. Not that I worked closely with that side of the organisation, mind, very much by my choice, although I rather suspect BITC likewise thought it would be good if I was kept away from the royal stuff as well. The individuals may or may not survive this, but the institution itself was stuffy, micromanaging, arrogantly full of itself, and you related to the royals by kowtowing to them in a fulsome and heartfelt manner. Oh, this issue has benefited so much from your superb leadership, your highness, blah, 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 blah. Now, I didn't do that. I didn't much mind it being done because you quickly learned at BITC that you could get good things done at scale with a bit of flattery to the right top people. You could change the world so long as you didn't mind who got the credit. And yes, nobody forced Charles to use that position to try to do some good in the world, which he did genuinely. And of course, we can mock some of the eccentric causes he would occasionally attach himself to, but he could easily simply not have bothered. Instead, the palace would be sending letters of invitation to top chief executives to persuade them to accompany the prince on a visit to an inner city area, to a drug rehabilitation clinic, a homelessness shelter, prison, whatever it might be, where they could see things with their own eyes they didn't normally get to see when they were in their chauffeur-driven Jags. We all know that if I sent them such an invitation, it wouldn't even get as far as the room where the bin is kept. But those invitations, they all got read. They didn't always get accepted, but certainly quite a few of them did. And as a result, a lot of companies got involved with all sorts of local community initiatives trying to invest in the health of their communities as a result. Definitely a good thing to happen. Wouldn't have happened without him. But I knew I never wanted to have anything to do with that part. Let me give you an example why. When I started at BITC, I was based in one of their offices in the north part of the country. There was one of these seeing is believing visits planned for a local rural school. One of the prince's top flunkies, who shall remain nameless, was sent to check it out so the event could be planned. The prince's visits were planned on a minute-by-minute breakdown. This particular flunky was given a tour of the school by the head teacher. He was particularly proud of the fact that this school had a relatively modern IT suite, which was more of an exception rather than a rule at that point in history. Yes, youngsters, I'm actually that old. Anyway, she said to him, "Oh, no, this won't do at all. The prince likes traditional crafts, woodworking and the like. Can we clear this lot out and bring in some of those traditional crafts?" And to give our head teacher his due, he refused. And the visit went ahead anyway, and for once the prince got to see the world as it really is, not how his flunkies had pre-shaped it to fit his preferences. But it gave you a sense of how hard it must be for anyone in that position to understand the world. As the saying used to go, to the Queen, the world smells of fresh paint. Even when he was leading a visit to see the community as it really was, he had these underlings trying to sanitize it before he got there. Now, my contempt for those people, or at least for that activity that they did, knew no bounds, because ultimately it ruins you. Charles is now famous for being tremendously fussy about how everything has to be just so. He has his breakfast in exactly the way he likes it, down to where things are placed on the table. Well, like most of the royal men, he started life in the military, where he wouldn't have got any of that and he'd have been treated the same as everyone else. So at some point, he had to make the transition from that starting state to the sheltered and ridiculous existence that he has now. But look, he's okay. And his number one son seems better. So maybe we end up with this institution for the foreseeable future. But the fact of number two son should be a warning sign. I remember towards the end of my time at BITC, the Prince of Wales wanted his sons to visit and understand his various charities, and a visit from Prince Harry was announced. Now, he was in, I guess, his early 20s at this point. I'd heard that the palace had told BITC that holding the young prince's attention would be something of a challenge. But if we could arrange to have the presentation given by, well, a younger female member of staff, a couple of them, perhaps wearing short skirts, that might do the trick. Now, of course, they stood up against that demand and refused to pander to the royal brat. No, I'm kidding. They did exactly what they were asked. I stayed well away from the office on that day, had no interest in being part of such a show. Pretty disgusted with the demeaning nature of it all. Now, sure, you have to do some stuff to get things done, but you should be prepared to draw a line somewhere. So it wasn't a surprise to me that Harry was the one who ultimately went off the rails. I mean, he seemed to mature from being in the armed forces, as you might expect, and he did well in championing the Invictus Games. But ultimately, he was shallow and extremely fragile, and that's a potent mix just ripe for capitulating to the emerging woke culture. His life seems to be a tragedy in progress. Don't imagine we've reached the end of the saga, because again, with a royal family, whether you've gotten bored with it or not is never the factor. The royals is the soap opera. Yes, you can ignore, as I generally do, but it's always on in the background. Sometimes it will force your attention in spite of what you wish. And it's worth giving it as little attention as possible. I read that a huge amount of royal gossip that generally gets printed is just made up. Since the royals mostly never answer back, it's easy to get away with it. So I tend to think that by reading none of it, I'll know about as much about the royals as most people, because at least my head isn't full of nonsense and lies about them. I've seen enough with my own eyes to understand why the institution matters on the one hand and that it has some merits, but also enough to know that its limitations are baked in. And however good the people may be, and William Kate seemed better than we had the right to expect, sooner or later it will drag them down to the same level of absurdity. Would a republic be better? Well, it depends on better than what. Better than the current Queen? Almost certainly not. Better than King Harry? Almost certainly yes. Better than Charles and then William? Who knows? But again, it's not really about the fact of how good they turn out to be. It's the fact we have no choice. But this is where we are. Many people will be turning out for the Jubilee celebrations. They do so because they feel a sense of duty, they feel a sense of celebration, they feel a sense of commitment to the institution. Let's not pretend that's going to go away anytime soon. The freedom to choose badly is one that we're having to defend in all sorts of arenas at the moment, versus the idea that we should have choices made for us instead by a state that believes it knows better. One could say that the royal family is the epitome of the latter mindset. And of course they don't have a choice either. I mean, Harry did at least speak truth when he said that his family were trapped in the institution. You can respond to that by accepting the duty that it confers on you, of course, a mindset that he didn't have. But let's be clear, we don't choose them, but they also don't choose the role. But I didn't make this video because I'm in campaigning mode on republicanism or anything like that. Really just because the current situation with the Queen, absent from Parliament, is a reminder to us all that change is coming. And for various reasons, I think that change, as it plays out over the course of the coming decade, say, will be bigger than we think. In spite of my detached attitude to the people concerned, I am interested and curious to see what this is going to look like in terms of how we see ourselves as a nation and how we are governed. This is the second video that I've done, which was basically my personal reflections on a theme. The first one I did was about why so many people today are feeling lost. If you made it this far, you might want to watch that video next.